LS Tractor Adventure.
Welcome back. Now that I've got the tiller out of the crate and hooked up to the tractor, I'm going to go ahead and cut the PTO shaft. Now I'm going to cut the shaft to fit my LS here, so I'm sure there's going to be people that will disagree with how I do this. There's probably 100 different variations of how to do this. You can get down strings down and measure and all that stuff, and this just the way I do it is a way an old farmer showed me how to do it, and I think it's always worked for me. I've never caused any damage to any of my tractors, so I think that's the test that passes. Whether it passes or not is whether it damages your equipment. Alright, here's the shaft on the tiller, and I've got the cover off so I can put my finger up in here. This is the splines going up and down on the PTO input for the tiller. Now if you follow it back to further towards the back, there's a dip, there's a cutout here, and that is so the clamp-on yoke, you slide the clamp-on yoke up, and then you put the bolt through this, through the yoke, and it dips partially down into the splines, and when you tighten that bolt up, the splines or the yoke can't slide back off. So this is very important. Now what I do for measuring, I measure from the center of this bolt cutout to the very, very tip of the tractor's PTO, to the very tip. And the reason I do that is because you've got to be able to slide the yoke up onto the PTO here, so it can't be any longer than that, obviously, or you won't be able to slide it on. So I measure the distance between the very tip of this and the bolt center of the bolt cutout on the PTO shaft, and then that gives me my overall length of the shaft. Alright, now I'm going to measure the distance from the splines of the PTO to that cutout for the bolt hole, and I'm going to measure that to the very tip of this PTO on the tractor. I have 25 inches. Now take into account when you slide the yoke up on the tractor that you're going to be extending 2 more inches. So I like to have a little bit more than 2 inches of tolerance on PTOs. Most of the time I shoot for 3. But in these subcompacts, you are cutting the shaft so short. I mean, we're cutting the shaft at its collapsed point has to be 25 inches. And that is very short when you take into account the slip clutch and the yokes. On this subcompact, you've got to take into account that when you lift the implement up, that your distance between your PTO could increase or decrease because of the type of trajectory that these arms go. In most subcompacts, that you will actually lose a little bit of distance. So I went ahead and raised mine and measured from the PTO just the same measurements again, from PTO to PTO, and I come up with 24 inches. So I lost an inch by lifting it up to the highest position. So technically, if I cut my overall length of my shaft to 25 inches and then slide it up on 2 inches, that would give me an inch of free play at the highest point, so that it would still have room, it wouldn't bottom out. But just to be on a safe side, I'm probably going to go ahead and cut my shaft at 24.5 inches total length, and that'll give me an 1.5 inches of free play once I slide it up onto the back of the tractor. I've already separated the PTO shaft here, as you can see, and I thought I'd go ahead and just talk just briefly about the PTO shaft protective cover, the plastic cover that goes over it. There's several different versions of them, how to take them on and off, so I'm not going to go into great detail on how to take these on and off because they're different for different manufacturers. Just follow your directions. Most of them are just either clip-on or they have a little twist and turn off, or there's like I said, there's several different ones. But just read your own owner's manual on this, and it's not very hard. Alright, I want to talk about the PTO shaft here. This is the outer sleeve, and there's an inner sleeve that goes inside this. This PTO shaft has a flat spot. If you look right here on top, there's a flat spot. So, and also there's an additional flat spot on the inner PTO. Now when you're going to slide that shaft in here, make sure that you line the flat spot up to the flat spot first, or you can be out there in an awkward position trying to, you know, if you ever slide these apart in the field, you can be out there in an awkward position for days trying to slide this back up there, you know, get it in the right position. So, you know, if you start off knowing that there's a flat spot, a lot of people don't know that. All right, what I've got here is a big old socket. Now what I want to try to do is keep this shaft as level as I can. And this has got that slip clutch on it, so I want this slip clutch to be pretty much as level as it can be. And then I'll get this shaft, or this part of the yoke, the same. And then we'll go ahead and let's see if we can get this to set up here right. And then what I want to do is I want to measure. Now remember, I wanted to measure from the tip of the tractor PTO to the center of the hole on the tiller. So we'll go ahead and do this now. Alright, this particular shaft from the center of the hole to the very tip is 32 inches. So what we want it to be when it's all said and done is 24.5 inches long. Okay, the way my my Tennessee math counts is that this thing is 32 inches long, and we needed to get it to a 24.5 inch overall length. Now, what we're going to have to do is take 7.5 inches off of each end of the shaft. Now, you can't just take it off of one end of the shaft. You have to take it off on both ends of the shafts, or you'll end up with a you know, the same length. It just doesn't work that way. You have to cut it off on both ends. Alright, again, like I said, this could be done probably much safer in a shop. My shop's sitting right there, but I wanted you to see how this would look in the field. Alright, so again, we're going to take 7.5 inches off of this shaft on both ends. So I'm going to go ahead and make my mark. If you have a metal scribe or a screwdriver, something to make your mark. Alright, so we're going to take 7.5 inches off of each end of the shaft. Here's the other shaft. Go ahead and make our mark on this one as well. Alright, I've made my measurements of 7.5 inches here and 7.5 inches here, and that'll allow this shaft to be put back together and collapse down to 24.5 inches. So that gives me 2.5 inches of leadway, so that as the tiller is raising up and down, that it will never, the two shafts will never bottom out and cause pressure to go onto the tractor or the PTO input, either one of those. I just always want a little bit of extra. I probably could have got away with 2 inches on this tractor because there's so little movement during the up and down process. But you need to make sure on your tractors the trajectory of the 3-point hitch arms. Each one of them is a little different. Some of the older Massey Fergusons and some of the older Kubotas, their 3-point hitch arms were mounted much lower to the ground, and it really changes how the 3-point hitch works from up to down. So your PTO shaft can be a little bit, or your PTO implement can be a little bit closer or a little bit further based upon how much the implement is raised or lowered. I'm going to use the Sawzall to cut these shafts. You could easily use a hacksaw if you were in the field and didn't have a battery-powered Sawzall, but I have one, and so I'm going to use it. I'm going to scotch my shaft in the corner of the bucket here. Now take into account that the this has still got metal fragments flying around. Wear some safety glasses. Like I said, I've told you guys in the past, I've had metal dug out of my eyes, and it is just no fun. Probably not going to have a file out in the field. Ideally, it would be nice to have a little triangle file. But if you don't have a file, you can take the edge of a screwdriver and rake around on the inside here, making sure that there's no burrs. You can rake around on the outside with the edge of the screwdriver, making sure there's no burrs. And that way the shaft will slide inside easily, and also the outside will not cut the crap out of you. Alright, we got the first one cut. We'll move on to the second. Now this is the exterior, or the sleeve side of the shaft. Really doesn't make any difference. It's the same. We're taking the same length off of both sides. I'm going to wipe this down and go ahead and make sure there's no burrs on the inside or outside of this. And then there's little metal flakes where you cut it, and there's nothing you can do about that. You're going to have to clean those out best you can. But this is not a critical joint. It would take a lot of the metal flakes over a lot of years to actually cause any real damage. But me being the perfectionist that I am in such things, I want it clean. Now this cut is not exactly square, but in this case, for a field repair, it doesn't matter. Okay, good and clean. Now let's see if they'll go together. Earlier on I was telling you about the different, there's a square or flat spot. Here's the flat spot, and I just found a burr. So I want to make sure this one's on the inside, and it's got to be clean on the outside or it will not slide on. So there's a little burr. We're going to just do a double take on that. Feel around. Careful not to cut yourself because they're sharp. I don't see any more burrs. Now here's the flat spot, and there's the flat spot on top. So we are going to slide these together as such, and they should slide right together. Voila, look at there. Alright, now we're going to talk about the sleeve covers that go down the PTO shaft, the safety covers. Now basically what you're going to do on this is the exact same thing. You are going to take off the exact same amount that you took off of the PTO shaft, so 7.5 inches. Now what I am going to do is I am going to switch out my Sawzall blade to a little bit more aggressive. A little more aggressive blade so it cuts through the plastic and not melt through the plastic. I'm going to try my best to make this as a smooth and straight as cut as I can. And I just messed it up. But luckily I messed it up on the side that's getting cut away. So let's see what we can do with this. Alright, we're going to take the other piece, do our measurement on this. Seven and a half inches is marked. This stuff cuts through really quick with a Sawzall. So 7.5 inches is marked, so we'll go ahead and try to gently that blade is very aggressive, and it really cuts through that plastic pretty quick. Now do the same thing with your screwdriver or your pocket knife. Honestly, I like to use a screwdriver because in my youth I was using a pocket knife cutting something, and I cut all the way to the bone of the finger. So I'm a little bit skittish nowadays of using a knife when I can just kind of round it over with a screwdriver and know that I'm not going to cut my finger off. Alright, we'll put our shaft back together now. Alright, I'm going to put my shaft back together. Let's see if I can get these on the right side. Let's see, this one goes on here. And voila, through the magic of TV, it is put back together. Alright, this is a great opportunity to make sure that this shaft has enough lube in it. The shaft will flex some, not a whole lot, but it will flex up and down. So get you a good helping of grease, put it inside this shaft and lube it around, move it around. And then also put a little bit around the outside of the one that you're getting ready to slide in. And then hopefully you have some rags handy, because when you're in the field you always probably don't have what you need for rags. Alright, we're going to find the flat spot and then the flat spot on both sides of the shaft. Slide them together and slide these together. And voila, you have a cut PTO shaft. Now let's install it. What I'm going to do here, I use a garage door lube. It's a dry lube, it dries, and it's got Teflon in it. I go ahead and spray the inside of this down because this thing is going to be on here for a long time. So I go ahead and spray that down, and I spray the shaft that I'm going to install it on down, and I soak it down good so it's dripping. Now, I also split the shaft. This particular tiller has a slip clutch cover built on it, so it's kind of redundant. So now I've got it slipped on, and I'm sorry you guys can't see this, but I got a hole here where the goes through the splines, through that clamp, and I'm going to slide it back and forth until that bolt goes through. So the bolt has went through, and now all I have to do is tighten up the slip clutch end here. Here's one final look around the Titan 4-foot tiller. This is the 2104 model number. If you can see here, I've got the safety chains back on and hooked up correctly for the PTO shroud. And then give it a little quick look around.